Good Yantiv. Thank you for being with us on this Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is, of course, the Day of Atonement. It's a day on which we as individual Jews think about our own lives and how to be better versions of ourselves. It's when we as a congregation, we as a broader Jewish community, think about what it means to improve our collective. But we'd be remiss if we didn't also think about the collective of Baltimore City, the collective of the United States of America, at a moment in history that may prove to be an inflection point. The conversation you're about to hear with Wes Moore and three subjects of the book that he wrote with Erica Green, entitled 5 Days, A Fiery Reckoning of an American City, will reveal incredible stories, human stories, that will point us as a community toward the work that we need to be doing. Pay attention. They have much wisdom to offer. I thank Wes. I thank the other folks who are able to join us. Unfortunately, Erica Green, due to a scheduling conflict, was not able to be with us today, and I look forward to engaging Erica in the not too distant future here at Beth Am Synagogue. In the meantime, enjoy this conversation. May it move you as it has moved me. Well, it is my great honor to welcome Wes Moore, my friend, back to Beth Am Synagogue on this, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. Wes, you are a best-selling author, a combat veteran, a Rhodes Scholar, a social entrepreneur. You're now the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation and an organization that you call a change organization, and that addresses the endemic and systemic challenges of poverty. You and I have known each other for several years now. Your visit to Beth Am back in 2014, before Freddie Gray and the uprising that was inspired by his death, helped us. You really helped us clarify our thinking and concretize some of what we've done through our own work in IFO, our In4Of sister nonprofit of Beth Am Synagogue, the engagement in our community, the relational justice work that we strive to do here in Reservoir Hill. It's really a joy to welcome you back. Thank you for being here.
Rabbi Berg, the honor is all mine, and it's great to be back with Beth Am and be back with the congregation. And your work and your continued push for true justice and for true social change in the community and beyond it speaks levels about the fact that you find yourself not just in a community but of a community. And so I'm honored to be with you all today, and I'm really honored to be able to be here with Greg and Tawanda and Anthony and so many other people who weren't just profiled, who Eric and I both profiled and featured in 5 days, but people who really do represent the heartbeat of the city. So it is my honor to be here. So thank you.
Let me echo those thanks. I really, when we had this idea to have a conversation, your immediate instinct was, how can we amplify some of the voices of those folks who were depicted in the book? And so thanks for being here. For those, hopefully everybody's had a chance to read the book, but even if you haven't, I want you to meet these three incredible individuals. Tawanda Jones, a fierce advocate for justice for Black lives, in particular that of her own brother Tyrone West, who, like Freddie Gray, was killed in police custody. Anthony Williams Sr., who was the face of the Shake and Bake, Pennsylvania Avenue institution in West Baltimore, and Greg Butler, whose story reminds us of how much complexity and humanity lies hidden beneath any given headline or image. So thank you all for being here as well. I want to mention the book, of course. The book is 5 Days, The Fiery Reckoning of an American City, and it's a recounting of those 5 days of intense protest and rioting, beginning almost a week after 25-year-old Freddie Gray's death and continuing 2 days beyond his funeral. I found the stories mesmerizing, I have to say, and was really struck by your ability, Wes, together with your co-author, Erica Green, to weave together the different perspectives on an American moment that in many ways, I think, presaged the nationwide and worldwide events of this past summer. So Wes, let me start with you. What motivated you to tell this particular story? and why these particular 8 characters in that story?
I think one of the most fascinating things about the whole process was actually going and identifying who were the stories that we wanted to tell, right? And I think going through it, one thing I think we all know about Baltimore is, Baltimore is full of opinions and full of personalities. But then as you started to figure out all the conversations that I personally was having with people after the uprising, you started realizing that everyone, no matter where they were and what part of the city or strata of the city they were coming from, everyone had a different opinion. Everyone had a different thought. And so the idea behind 5 days was basically saying, how can we encapsulate the feelings and the emotions of the city in a way that feels true, authentic, honest, but also that you're walking with a real lens of someone who this is not just personal, but someone who was really at the tip of everything that was taking place. And so, you first start off with 50 people, then it brings down to 25. And then eventually it's brought down to this remarkable 8. And one of the things that I just loved about all of the 8 people that are followed within 5 days is all of them bring a very important lens to not just what happened over that 5 day period, but what happened to the lead up, what happened to the afterward, after everything, after the 5 days finished covering. And I remember that morning of Freddie's funeral being there. And remember thinking to myself that that was the first funeral that I've ever been to of someone who I never knew them while they were alive. And how disturbing in many ways that was, because in many ways it epitomized the problem that for many people, that would have been their story about Freddie. That for many people, who even the ones who were inside that church that day, these are people who never knew Freddie while he was alive. And so the idea of being able to tell this narrative, the ability to be able to talk about how this moment brought these people together in such different ways, it was something that forced me to better understand and attack my own complicity. It was something that forced me to understand and attack the things that, why wasn't I and others not more involved in what's going on, and understanding these leading things that will continue to lead to these situations happening, like one of the things that happened with Tyrone. But how are we then going to think about our future in a different way? How do we make sure that we don't have to continue having the same conversations and continue going through the same processes? When people say to me that, 5 days in this book is so timely, my argument always back is, name a single time in our nation's history when it wouldn't have been timely. And that's the problem. And so how do we then use this moment? How do we then use these remarkable stories to be able to make sure that they don't just become something that just are recurring tragedies, but things that we can actually put an end to, these things that break and should break all of our hearts?
If you could choose one surprising thing that you learned the process of researching and writing the book, what do you think it would be?
Oof. One surprising thing. I don't know if it was surprising, um, but it was illuminating. Uh, First of all, I think for anyone who reads the book and anyone who understands these individuals, both on the screen and the ones who were featured in the book but are not here today, um, the idea that no one is doing anything is just a lie. It's just false. There are a whole lot of people who every day are getting up and doing the work. Every single day are going out there and fighting. Every single day are going out there and advocating in their own way. Every single day are working to make the city better, are working to make our institutions better. And one of the things I saw, you can almost bucket the people who are kind of doing the change, within institutions, doing the change from outside of institutions, doing the change in their own individual environments. But the idea that no one is doing anything is just not true, and we can't allow and feed into that narrative. The thing that I think we have to also grapple with is the fact that institutions and structures haven't changed fast enough,
Mm.
and that we cannot continue to think that individual acts of goodness are going to uproot structures that actually have to be altered and changed. And so that was one of the things I think was was really illuminating because it wasn't just about anecdotal, right? I mean, this is data that we also introduce into this book. These are factual basis analysis about where we are. So there's people who are putting in the work and doing the fight. There are people who love this city with all of their heart. Our job is to provide help. And our job is to make sure that the systems that we are continuing to work against and throughout all systems, right? Our education system, health systems, justice systems, et cetera, across the board, that we're actually creating frameworks that are giving people a better opportunity to be able to have a life of joy and fulfillment.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point. And I remember being struck myself during the uprising and even during the rioting, getting calls from friends and family around the country who were saying, I'm watching CNN, I'm watching MSNBC, the entire city is on fire. Are you safe? Right. And I remember having like two reactions in that moment. One, you cannot see Baltimore if you're only looking at it through the lens of a news camera on CNN or MSNBC. Like there's a lot of Baltimore that's not on fire, and there's a lot of Baltimore that pre-existed this moment and will be here after the fact. And two, if you're concerned about my safety, you're not paying attention. Mm. And you know, because while anti-Semitism is real and the Jewish community has dealt with its own challenges, particularly in the last several years under this presidential administration, at least those Jews who are white have the same privileges as other white folks. And so like the safety I was concerned about in that moment was not my own safety, right? It was my Black and brown neighbors. It was the youth a mile from my house at Mondawmin Mall who were essentially trapped there because public transportation shut down. And so understanding what was really happening in those moments is us also understanding like who has access, who has power, who has privilege, how does the whole kind of system of white supremacy work, and how then can we, at least those of us with white skin privilege, be more attentive to the challenges of our African-American neighbors to better understand what they're going through and what's really going on beneath the surface. Let me ask you maybe one more question, Wes, before I turn to our other esteemed guests. You mention in the book this kind of bracing moment after Freddie Gray's funeral when you had to duck out early and fly to Boston and feeling a little guilty about the fact that you had to be so far away instead of here. Now, I remember having a similar moment where the call went out to clergy to go down and lock arms and stand between those who were, throwing bottles and police and try to kind of stand in the breach and bring some advice and sanity to the moment. And I couldn't be there because I had to drive out to the county to lead a Shiva Minyan, a memorial service for a congregant whose mother had died. And I had to trust that there were others, my colleagues, who were able to do what they needed to do so I could go and be there for my own congregants in that moment. But it was a really bracing moment for me. And I'm curious if you have anything to say, Wes, about what it means to be present, what it means to show up for justice, sometimes even when it's hard or maybe impossible to do so.
It's a great question. When I think about the idea of showing up for justice, actually, one of the first things I think about is Tawanda. I think one of the greatest compliments that I got after this book was my little sister wrote me, and she had a chance to read an advanced copy of the book, and she was very complimentary, but she said something at the end that will always stick with me when she said, I also want to thank you for introducing me to my new hero, Tawanda Jones. I think what it means to show up for justice, it means that you have to be consistent. I think what it means to show up for justice is that you have to be fearless, because it means you are walking into a fight that not everyone is going to like what you have to say, and you have to keep saying it. I think showing up for justice means that you don't walk in with a plan B, that you walk in with a plan A, and plan A must work. and you will figure out a way for plan A to work. And I think that when you look at the people who have marched for justice and who have fought for justice all throughout our world history, and one of the things I love the idea and thinking through our nation's history, because I think you can learn a lot from it. And I think showing up for justice also means, how can you build a coalition that is not just the impacted who are demanding their own justice? Part of the beauty for me of the civil rights movement, and I think it's an important moment to talk about, is the fact that where the civil rights movement went from a moment to a movement was when it was not just African Americans who were demanding justice. It became our Jewish brothers and sisters. It became people from other backgrounds who were saying, we can't let this stand. Right? When you look at apartheid South Africa, the thing that helped to lift apartheid South Africa was when it was not just Black South Africans who were saying, how can we allow this system to exist? Where you have people who are in majority who are treated not just as some form of a minority, but really as an oppressed class consistently. When we saw what the thing that helped to lift, move to marriage equality, was when it was not just our LGBTQI brothers and sisters and individuals who were saying love is love. And so when I talk about justice, it means we must be consistent. It means we must be fearless. And it must mean we must build coalitions that can turn moments into larger movements.
And Tawanda Jones, you are maybe the embodiment of that plan A, right? That tenacity, that stick-to-itiveness. You are your own person, of course, with your own career and your own dreams and aspirations, and yet you live a life enmeshed with the life, legacy, and memory of your brother. And please tell us about your brother and about how you experience your work advocating on his behalf for justice in the context of the story that Wes and Erica were trying to tell with this book.
Yes. First, before I start, I want to give like praises and compliments to Wes Moore and Erica for doing a great job, like beyond great job with this book, and just actually giving us this platform to have our voices heard. So I definitely had to put that out there first. But basically, when my brother Tyrone West was brutally murdered right here in Baltimore City over 7 years ago, actually 375 weeks ago, right? He was murdered. And me and my family, we had to deal with this. We had to deal with this untimely pain. We had to deal with being able to work, provide for our family, and at the same time, try to hold folks accountable for what they did to my brother Tyrone West. So instantly, we knew that this was bigger than my brother Tyrone West. From day one, we knew that these were not isolated incidents, that unfortunately is systemically happening, and it's happening around the world. So immediately, it was like, oh my goodness, like what do we do? You know, and then have to wear so many caps of working, being peaceful. But to me, what led it all and what still leads the way for me is being peaceful. Because I feel like once we lose integrity and peace and hope, all that, everything goes out the window. Then you're just as guilty or bad as the folks that brought harm upon your, the people that are getting murdered for no reason other than a system that's designed to basically wipe us out with all these lynching laws. So yeah, that's what did it for me, and that's what's continuously doing for me. I don't get honored by meeting different victims of police brutality, but what we did was immediately, my family, immediately, day one, like way before Freddie Gray, we basically tried to prevent what happened to Freddie Gray from happening, because we stood out there peacefully for weeks, for months, you know what I mean? Years, literally out there saying, hold folks accountable. Murder is murder. And especially in my brother's case, the first two cops were repeat violent offenders, right? Louise and Chapman, they have a history, right, of doing this, leading up a week before my brother getting murdered, and then ultimately murder my brother. And the saddest part, to this day, they're still victimizing victims. It's horrible. So we knew something needed to be done.
Yeah, and what strikes me about your brother's story, as opposed to Freddie Gray's story or George Floyd's, or maybe more similarly to Breonna Taylor, right, is that there wasn't the same kind of video evidence. And I'm wondering if you have any sort of thoughts about that. You know, a lot of people, I think right now, there's an awakening around the Black Lives Matter movement and saying, well, we're seeing the way that police brutality occurs. We're seeing the way that particularly Black men are targeted. And yet, when that happens off camera, and we can't see it, uh, that doesn't mean that it's not happening. Of course, it is happening, and it's probably happening in much higher numbers than the times that it actually is caught on camera. So, do you have any wisdom for folks who are listening today about how to navigate some of what they hear in the news and how to begin to move through people's own biases against what they hear versus what they can see with their own eyes?
Yeah, so basically, I just ask everybody to be their own conscious consumer. Don't believe the media, because do you know that the media can play a prominent role on actually making innocent people look guilty and guilty people look innocent. So do your own research. And if something doesn't feel right, it's not right. And unfortunately, there were videos of my brother's brutal murder. Will we ever see that? No, we may not, or we may. Who knows? We may see it next week if somebody comes forward with this video. But there is video footage. I want to be clear on that there is video footage, but we were never able to get this footage to our attorneys because we wanted to not be in the middle of an active investigation. So we went the next day, the day after my brother was murdered, with information leading them to Dwight Pettis' office, who's our attorneys, to seek these videos, right? So we wouldn't be in the middle of it, but no videos, like literally the videos were apprehended, or people ran from, fear of their life. They moved. I heard a guy that has the whole video from beginning to end moved literally the next day. The next day after my brother was murdered, it was way too much. So I'm just hoping, but it's just sad. It says a lot that when it's unfortunately that we have to take seeing somebody tortured, right, on video. Like we see Freddie Gray screaming and hollering in agonizing pain, right? We see George Floyd with that foot in his neck, right? But you don't have to see the video to know that that pain exists. If you have witnesses, eyewitness account, like even on the news before the video, like the video never surfaced on my brother. We saw solving victims, some solving witnesses basically depict what happened in their own recognition and said, this man was beat from one side of the street. It was horrible. When they were crying, that was enough. Like you don't need to see a video of my brother being tortured with David Lewis from Morgan State University with his foot in me and my brother's back. We don't need to see that to know that he was brutally murdered, beat over 18 minutes. Like, really? But it's just sad that we come to a point that because everything now is like on the internet with cameras, that we have to see pain and torture. We don't have to see it to know that it's real. So I ask everybody, to answer your question, I ask everybody, please be your own conscious consumer. Do your own research.
It's such a great point. And let me turn now to Greg, because in some ways, I mean, I think you're a great example of somebody who probably a lot of people in America misunderstood or didn't bother to try to understand. Tell us a little bit about how you came to that moment. The arc of your story is really compelling, Greg. And tell us a little bit about you and maybe what brought you to that moment of that iconic photograph on the cover of Time magazine, the young man with the gas mask on the bicycle. Who are you for real, and not just simply what people have made you out to be?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
That's a tough one. That's hard to describe because at some points in my life, I do feel like, the Hulk, in Infinity War, when he says, how did you learn to control yourself? And I'm always angry. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much how I move around in my daily capacity. I'm here at Green Street. I love it, like Wes alluded to before, because I'm here to do the work every day. I was introduced to the work that, which allowed me to stop complaining and be a part of the process of changing the things that I'm concerned about. But the problem is when you're 21, 22, 23, 24, and you're going through this process like I was going through in front of the world, and you're trying to learn and you want as much information as you can, a lot of times you find out that racism has already beat you there. And many times, especially in cities like this, people aren't honest about how much racism and exploitation and greed has entered every institution and almost every facet of life here. I work here. I'm here at 7 o'clock. I'm gone by 3:05. When I leave here at 4 o'clock, I'm a contractor and I have a maintenance company. I do maintenance all through the Maryland area and some 1,000 properties. And when I go into the counties, there's no problem. And when I come into the cities, I'm constantly reminded, and I constantly see the actions of these slumlords who hold our city back in their own little way. You know what I mean? Because they're preying on people who don't go, who would rather not go to court, who don't have a lot of cash, and don't have a great credit system or credit situation that allows them to give a lot of bargaining chips on where they want to live. And now, those people take advantage of them. And those people are constantly held back. Same thing when I went into the fire marshal's office. Chief Ford, who I'm forever indebted to, gave me the entire force of the fire department to come behind and rally behind me. And I get there and I'm at the fire marshal's office and I move around with a man who I like to keep unnamed. And he took me out and I was able to be this person who, nobody knows, right? Because I'm riding around in these fire trucks, in these fire cars. And we're doing all these sprinkler system inspections, you know what I mean, for all of these new buildings coming up in the city. And this guy tells me, man, I don't give these guys any slack because these guys rally together and they band together to keep all of the Black upstart companies out. And this, as much as you learn, you realize it's already been racist. So that's the hardest thing for me, because how many people are going to stop that day? I have 2 children. They got to eat. They got school. They've got, my son turned 4. He's starting pre-K on Zoom classes. That's a whole new can of worms. How many people are going to stop their day, right, and do the things necessary for someone whom realistically they almost benefit nothing from giving, right? You pour $100,000, $100 million onto Hilton Street, that doesn't affect. So I can't expect Roland Park to pour that money down to Hilton Street. And with that dynamic, you constantly running into a wall. Run into a wall because this thing is built on cash, and there's no incentive to empower Black people in the way that they need to be empowered. Black people need to be empowered in a situation where they control their own destiny. I don't have a problem with white people, all, but I do have a problem with anybody that doesn't look like me being in charge of any institution that I'm responsible for going into, because historically, you've not been responsible with it. So now that I move around in that, and that's where I am now, I really don't have time to, excuse my intensity, I don't have time to keep explaining and trying to, and really just stressing out about something that I just don't see happening. I don't see it. At 27 years old, I feel like a dinosaur. You know what I mean? I've been losing friends, as we noted in the book, over 20 years now. So in this space, and I just don't see. I don't see the complete picture the way many of some of my the people I revere do. I don't think we have the time that we think we do. I think a lot of people are really, really comfortable in this place, and I just don't get it. I don't know why. Maybe because I am a little bit more hungry. Maybe because I do know that I have to work 12 hours a day to make sure that my family gets what they do. And the people that don't, they get a false sense of reality. Reality is Baltimore's Baltimore, and it's our city too. You know what I mean? And there's no, and I don't want to dominate the conversation, but there's no opportunity to not be peed off. I'm here, man. I'm here at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I know it'll stop when I get close to West age and I start losing my hair a little bit, start looking a little bit more established. But as a 27-year-old man at 7:30 in the morning, I got to explain why I'm here on the campus. You know what I mean? Moving around before anybody else is there. Not that I want to be, educated. Not that I want to be a doctor by 40 and I have to buy into this. And I'm here 12 hours a day. It does not. It's the squeezy boy theory. It's not that I'm willing to work 12 hours and stand in the sun and work for $1 a piece. The first thing you're going to ask me is, where'd you get the squeegee? Did you steal it from the gas station? That's our experience as a young black man. And that's been my experience. And it's been consistent with every young man I deal with. So that's a little bit who I am. That's a little bit of the work I do. And that's it.
One of the things I've been grateful for, though it's been a long time coming, is that in more recent months and years, there seems to be at least a larger percentage of white folks who are willing to talk to one another about this stuff and not simply rely on people of color to explain this to us over and over again. And I hear that kind of exhaustion and frustration coming from you of like, you just, why should I have to explain this to you? Like, go read some books and talk to each other and figure it out already. And you're right, of course, like we do need to do exactly that, right? One of the, my own, awakening has been many years coming. Reading Wes's book, The Other Wes Moore, was an important kind of touch point along that journey. And Wes, maybe I can ask you in kind of thinking about that infamous moment of Greg cutting the fire hose. I was struck in the book by these different accounts, right, of what most people saw or thought they saw and what Jenny thought she saw. And I'm curious what your reflections are on that.
I think that there were a few scenes in the book that I think really struck me. That was a really important one because that was one of the few times where you had kind of this crash moment of all these people who, and as you saw Rabbi Berg, for some of the people that are profiled in the book, they've never actually met each other in person before. But you have these moments like the time when Greg cut the fire hose, that was this time where you had this crash of these different people and the different perspectives on it, right? So you had, for example, Jenny, who, when she saw the fire hose come out, her impression was, I know the history of fire hoses. And when I see fire hoses, I know what it looked like in the civil rights movement. We saw pictures and videos of people putting fire hoses on human flesh and watching how the strength of that fire hose, I mean, something that was designed to put out four-alarm fires, that it will literally rip the skin off of a person. And so when she saw the fire hose coming out, there was that initial fear about what that all meant, right? And so for Jenny, her watching Greg cut the fire hose, when she's looking at Greg like, this person just saved me from the impact of the things that I saw from videos from generations ago. You look at a perspective like someone like Partee in that same incident. Major Mark Partee was a major in the Baltimore Police Department, who, when he saw that, and it was actually a very funny thing where Mark and Greg had a chance to virtually meet. I guess it's about 2 months ago now, Greg. And Greg, when he saw Mark, actually learned from the book that when Mark saw Greg pulling out the knife for the fire hose, Mark was about to tase Greg. And Greg was, when he finally met Mark, he's like, yeah, you're the guy about to tase me. But then when Mark realized, when Mark got orders from his superior saying, if you tase him, I'm taking that and I'm taking a gun. So Mark is looking at Greg doing that same exact action. And for him, that was one of these things where he was like, well, I guess we just can't do our jobs now. I guess we're just gonna let this happen then. And so you saw how the same exact incident had completely different reactions and completely different perspectives, which is one of the things that I loved about the idea of bringing these various perspectives together. And I'll say that I think that moment for Greg was also a really powerful and important one too. And you bring up The Other Wes Moore because I think one of the things that I wanted to illustrate in that story is how thin that line is between our life and someone else's life. And how thin that line is between the decisions that we make and the decisions that are made for us. How thin that line is between us having a very different tomorrow than the ones we might imagine right now. And part of the reason why I wanted to, and I know Erica wanted to, as we were leading up into the Monday, as we're leading up into that moment, is spend that Sunday talking about Greg and his journey. Talk about what led Greg to that space at that moment on that Monday. And then hopefully allow the reader, allow the person who's hearing these stories, before you cast a judgment, take a pause and understand this journey. Take a pause and understand this young man who sits in front of us right now, and this even younger man when this incident happened, because context matters in us, in our ability to be able to understand the world that we're living in and the people and all of our neighbors who are around us.
And the incredible, thing is, social scientists tell us that what makes human beings unique from the rest of the animal kingdom, right? There are a lot of things that humans do that animals do, and vice versa, right? Humans take care of our loved ones, or, our young, or our siblings. Like, there are animals that do the same. Humans can be cruel. Certainly, animals can be cruel. What really sets us apart is humans have an ability to tell stories, right? We can create shared narratives, and that stories help us really understand, to have a sense of empathy. And what I think you're describing is the real empathy deficit that exists in this country. That, there are just too many people desperately incurious about other people, and they see an image. That image triggers some sort of implicit bias that was formed at a very young age through no fault of their own, right? Because we're all racist, living in a society marinating in systemic racism. But then we act on those biases. We allow ourselves to act on those biases, and oftentimes the action is an inaction. It's a shutting down. It's an unwillingness to probe, to be curious, to say, yeah, but what was really going on behind that moment? What's really going on inside that person's head? Anthony, you're someone whose story I'd be really interested to hear. I was struck in the book by just how central not only Shake and Bake is, but how central you were and are to the story of Shake and Bake. And when I think about like what was happening in Penn North, in Sandtown, in Pennsylvania Avenue, interestingly enough, in my neighborhood, Reservoir Hill, there wasn't a lot happening at all, right? Again, because people misunderstand what was really going on in those days 5 years ago. But the Pratt Library was untouched. The Shake and Bake was untouched. Why was that? And what is the story of the Shake and Bake and your relationship to it? Why does that matter?
Well, for one, first of all, thank you, Wes, again for this opportunity. I want to say thank you to Wanda. Thank you to Greg. Never had a chance, like Wes said, to meet in person, but just hearing the different stories, of course, there's always empathy. And Shake and Bake still is an interesting facility, because it wasn't until I read the book, actually when Wes sent it out to us, I just sat here at this computer and I like read that book in probably like 4 hours or so, because I just wanted to know what was Partee want to say to me. What did Greg think, or what did Greg do? And what was interesting to me about Greg, I went to the Dawson's house in 2010 when I was first trying to get Shake and Bake. And this guy took me to the Dawson house, so I'm trying to figure out, so why are we here? But while standing in there, reading the book put me back in touch to a feeling that I had when I went to this Dawson house, because I went to the school across the street as well. I think it was like Jameson or something like that. But when I was in the Dawson's house, I was standing there in silence. I was saying, there's something about this place. What is it about this place? So when I'm reading the book and you're talking about Greg, I'm like, was that the connection that I felt years ago? I was just kind of like clueless. But Shake and Bake was very interesting, because I remember the book again took me back to my very first day going to Shake and Bake for employment, And Wes talked about how I didn't graduate across that stage, and I knew I had to work because I didn't have one of those mothers that was going to allow you to be home. So while it was prom time, May 29th, I was at Shake and Bake in 1985 trying to get high. And I stayed in that lobby, and I'm going somewhere with this because I stayed in that lobby for 9 hours waiting for the director to come back. But I did go down to McCullough Homes because I had a friend there, and I went to our house and I was hungry. So I asked, so they made me some burgers and fries. But even walking from Shake and Bake to Dolphin and Pennsylvania Avenue, I felt a sense of I belong here. And that helped me to understand the whole piece about passion and purpose. Now, the work that I was doing was just a derivative of what my grandfather, that we mentioned in the book, but my grandfather took care of a community. Right now, the school is there. What's the school Hopkins built on Chester and Ashland? That new school.
Henderson Hopkins.
There you are. My grandfather's business was right there at that same location, Ashland and Chester. And I watched how my grandfather just kind of took care of that community. I was, of course, a little boy, but I remember that like it was yesterday, how he was so attentive to taking care of the needs of the people in that community. So when I got to Shake and Bake, and as the years developed, it didn't hit me until I read this book that I was doing the work that Grandpa did in East Baltimore when I was like 4 and 5 years old. So it all kind of came full circle. And the other thing is, I was able to give back to the young people because I had the opportunity to go to college. I had the opportunity to do well in school. I had all of those opportunities, but I had a stronghold in my life that just took precedence over everything that I desired to do. So reading the book, it put me back into some places where I was like, wow, this stuff really, really, really happens. It really, really works. But you have to have a mindset, because when we did the Enoch Pratt, I wasn't focused because I was so excited because I had some young people that had graduated from high school. I've been a part of their lives since they were like 8 and 9 years old. But to see them graduate at the top of their classes, when they were in the 10th, they were fighting every day, going wayward. But just my wife and I just taking the trip to the school, finding out what's going on with Destiny. Why is Destiny acting like this? And when the guidance counselor showed us her grades, she had 1 A- on there, but everything else was above. So I said, something's wrong. So what we did was, we said, we're going to focus on your academics, because that's your good point. That fighting, we're going to give you a job. You're going to work at Shake and Bake on weekends. One fight, you're done. She wound up being in the top 2% nationally on the academic level from Western High School. So you see them, you can zero in on some will, some won't, some do, some don't. That was my motto. Some going to get it and some will not get it. And Malik was one of the ones that got it up until a certain point. And then, I saw what was going on, because I saw decades of, this was the pattern. 14-year-old had a baby. By the time she was 15, the baby, that summer, the baby in the stroller on the avenue with her. A couple years later, mom's still on the avenue, still a teenager, baby 3 now, baby walking up and down the avenue. Now, by the time the baby's 7, he or she on their own, they go into the Yakima joint by themselves, they go into the Avenue Market by themselves. So I saw this over like 3 decades. And you're staring poverty in the face for this long, but one thing my wife and I did, we were adamant about not judging, acceptance, loving. And I used to tell my wife all the time, love meets needs. Go back to John 3:16. One word in there. God so loved the world. Then everything else came behind that love piece. So to whom much is given, much is required. They needed a lot of love. We had love to give. We gave them love. They gave it back. And it was just a mutual respect, man. You know, when Wes came to Shake and Bake, I was there. We just didn't connect. Probably when Greg came, when Tawanda would visit, I was there, but you know, so many people you didn't connect. And I was saying, I probably have seen them and didn't even know. But I was so interested in the well-being of people in that community. It was just a no-brainer, you know. So I know, you know, I've been a public servant. I used to volunteer to work. I think it was Baltimore Summer Corps at that time, but I was 8. You had to be 14. So when I did turn 14, I was able to work, but I said that to say that's why I took in 100 to 150 youth workers every summer, because I was on the waiting list. You know, even with the drug addiction, if I could help them, I had no problem telling them. And I used the term dope fiend because I knew that's what they could relate to. They couldn't relate to, I used heroin. They couldn't relate to, you know, I smoked the pipe. You know, I told them I started heroin, ended up crackhead. That's what they could connect and relate to. And their response was, no, Mr. Ant. And I was honest. I tell them I wasn't always as refined as I am now, you know, and I let them know I was a mess. But then I would also tell them this facility is what helped bring me to where I am today. And we're still there to this day. You know, we communicate, we do things together. They haven't forgotten me. I haven't forgotten about them. But I encourage them to read the book. 3 of them did purchase. Now I did have to purchase for some others, but 3 purchased, and the 3 that purchased, these are the same ones, you know, they're going to college now, but they had their little Wells Fargo from the financial literacy programs that we used to have come into the center and teach them. They still have their Wells Fargo debit cards, and they swiped and they purchased the book. So all little things like that really like get my goat and make me, you know, super excited on the inside, because it lets me know from the inception, these were the ones. So when the mayor and them came in and did their little demonstration, they didn't upset the work. Well, they did upset the work, but they didn't stop it, because it still continues. I'm still in contact with the young people. You know, I still do what I can to assist if I'm able, you know, but even in that situation with the former mayor, you know, I opened up assisted living facilities, and who had to come and visit my first resident? The former mayor that literally put us out. They gave us 30 days, and we didn't leave bitter. You know, we didn't leave bitter. And Wes, with the support from Wes and his wife Dawn, they came. Because they connected instantly. They saw that somebody needs to know about this, because that was the first thing Wes asked me. Nobody knows what you're doing. I didn't do it for people to know.
And I'm really struck. Thank you. And I mean, I just thank you for your decades of mentorship and also your vulnerability. I mean, that really goes for all of you. I think what's so compelling about your stories is not your humanity, right? That's obvious, I think, but like your willingness to be vulnerable with your humanity, your willingness to not just stand for issues and changes that we all need to be made, but your willingness to sort of be out there in the fullness of yourselves and the arc of your lives. Our time is running somewhat short, so I want to maybe throw out 1 or 2 final questions just to anybody who would like to tackle them. As I've been listening to all of you reflect on your stories from 5 years ago, on the book, I'm struck by the kind of tension that exists between, on one hand, the anger that Greg spoke of, right? The feeling like the Hulk who's always angry. You know, social justice activists talk about cool anger, right? And the difference between cool anger and hot anger. Hot anger usually is less constructive, but cool anger really kind of undergirds justice movements. Like, you got to be angry, you got to feel somewhat enraged, and then sort of tap into that simmering anger in order to actually make change and to be authentic. And at the same time, I'm also, there's just like a sense, you know, Anthony and all of you really, you know, a sense of love, a sense of respect, of empathy, and a willingness to say, like, you know, yes, the world's on fire. Yes, there's so much that has to change with Baltimore, and yet I'm not going to judge. Right? I'm gonna look for the good. I'm gonna look to impact people's lives. I'm gonna look to better myself. All these kinds of things. I'm curious, looking back now. This past summer, we saw, in many ways, like just the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement on a different level, making it arguably the most successful mass movement in American history. Right? I mean, just the numbers of protests and rallies around the country, in every city just about in the country, and in so many cities around the world. What a remarkable turn of events. 5 years ago in Baltimore, it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like that to me. I suspect it didn't quite feel like that to you. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about what, if anything, has changed from 2015 to 2020. Have things changed? Was 2015, kind of a bump on the road, but a road really just paved inexorably with white supremacy? Or are we moving somewhere? And I don't want Pollyannish responses. I want the truth, right? Like, what do you all think? Are we headed somewhere? Do you have any real hope for the future?
So can I jump in with real fast? So looking at 2015 and looking at now, I feel like, and I always am hopeful, but I really feel like now, because you see everybody in the world is participating, right, in some sort or whatever. So I think now, like now, even down to when you see NFLs, like when you think about Colin, when he first took the knee, he was frowned upon. He lost his job and things of that nature. But now you see the NFL, they're wearing names of victims on their heads. You do see this difference, right? But to me, the real change come in when you hold folks accountable. We can do all this other stuff, which is great, and I'm definitely with it. But the real part comes back to reopening all these cases, revisiting, revising, reopening all these cases, and holding folks accountable. Because until we hold people accountable, you might have this big thing happening, but then as soon as the cameras go away, as soon as everything goes back, because right now we're in a pandemic. You get what I'm saying? All this happened, whereas so people are forced virtually to watch things, virtually to just, you're in your home, you're trapped type of thing, to see actually what's going on. To whereas though when people would see stuff like that, I think when the lynching of George Floyd happened, had we not been in a pandemic, the people were working, some folks wouldn't even turn on their TV to even watch that. But because everything was shut down, it was like, oh yeah, and it even actually forced people that are basically supposed to be inside their house to be actually say, you know what, I'm going out there. We heard that cry, all the mothers, all the family members, we heard that cry of him crying for his dead mother. Change needs to come. You get what I'm saying? So I feel like something is happening, but the most important thing that needs to happen is accountability.
Thanks, Tawanda. Anyone else want to weigh on that question before we wrap up?
I just believe that we cannot stop. We talk, we start, and no disrespect to African American, but we are great procrastinators. We are great start but non-finishers. Me, I'm speaking for myself. We can't start this project, stop the project, and try to reignite the fire to the project. You gotta keep moving. We can't stop. We have other people that understand. I think other people understand now. I think it was a lack of understanding before, but I think now, like you said, Tawanda, because we were forced to watch. Okay. I was driving through Stoneleigh trying to take the back way to get somewhere. Stoneleigh, Wes, you're familiar with the Stoneleigh neighborhood community, predominantly Caucasian. But it's almost like every house I was counting the Black Lives Matter in the lawn, So people are starting to understand now. I find myself being defensive. I was in the grocery store the other day, an older Caucasian brother, said something to the lady because we were just practicing social distancing. And he even got to saying how much we can't read and so forth and so on. So I had to get in. Normally I would sit back but I had to get in, and I just had to bring some reasoning to it and help the older gentleman to understand, brother, we do read, we can read. And guess what? And I took a book to one of the older ladies there. I said, and you can have this, because this is a book about somebody like me that's standing in this grocery store watching you deal with a sister, the way, I mean, call the names and everything. So he took the book. I'm saying all that to say, he took the book. Okay. I really wanted to get his number, but I couldn't, but he took that book, Wes. So he has the book. Okay.
Mhm.
But, you know, we have to stand up. We have to say stuff. We have to say things. We have to let them know, no, that's not right. This is what you need to do. This is how you have to, it's all about communication, you know, but we can't stop. We got to keep pushing, and we got to encourage our young people. You can vote. It's
Perfect.
critical.
And speaking of younger people, not as young as you used to be, Greg, but any final thoughts from you? I know we have just a few minutes before we have to wrap up, but from 2015 to 2020, any thoughts from you about what's changed with you, with Baltimore, with America?
I think it's a little longer than that. I look at now, my love for history has me, I'm connected to the complete Black story. And if you pay attention from the 1600s to now you see that we've always been consistent with pushing our agenda and getting a piece of this country and getting some humanity. And what we're fighting for constantly changes. The way we fight for it changes. The tools and resources that we have to get our goal changes, but the result has been the same. We're still fighting that same fight. We're still fighting racism. We're still fighting greed. Still fighting oppression, and it's just presenting itself in different ways. That's why I try to make the kids understand. Because if you can't connect to it, then it turns into something outside of your story. But if you know that, hey, both Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman come out of Maryland. Yeah. Arguably, 40% of, top 5 of Black African Americans of all time come out of this space. So if you understand it like that, then you say, oh, I was bound to happen. Because this space is always producing people who are going to come and change. If you don't see it like that, you can't connect it. And then people will tell you, hey, Greg, you bad. Hey, Greg, you're this. Hey, Greg, you're that. But those people were criminals first. And those people had to do whatever it took to push us and get us here. And they're still coming out of this space. And that's the way I view myself. I see it as a 400-year fight, 500-year fight. So the last 5 years, I think coronavirus did play a big deal of it. People being locked in the house and focus on stuff that they usually wouldn't have. You leave work. We all leave work and handle family and have our social life. And before you know it, it's time to start tomorrow. And oppression and racism has existed the entire time. But when you shut it down, right, and you show the country that we're all, Mike have said it the best. When the bank is closed, we're all equal, right? A lot of us value, put our life's work into providing and getting that thing. But when the bank is closed, you know what I'm saying? Those issues that we try to play like don't exist, they'll be at the forefront. Talking about health and not being able to move around. That was something that was so big, it was bigger than color. And as long as we remember that and we keep that in our space, I think we will make change. But I understand how fast a day moves too. So some of us have to do the work and come out and make the noise to let you know that you don't have the time that you think you have. But
Wes, let me give you the last word. I know you got to go in 1 minute. Take us home here.
Well, first, I just want to say I just want to thank God for you, Rabbi Berg, and thank God for Anthony, for Greg, for Tawanda, and for the entire congregation. I really just want to echo a lot of what I've heard before, because here's the reality: is that progress is a culminating force. Justice is a culminating force. It's something that happens when you put pressure on something for long enough until it cracks. Right. And there would be no global protests that we have seen and that we're seeing right now across the globe. Because you're right, literally 1 in every 10 Americans have attended at least one protest during this time period. It's the largest movement in our nation's history. And that would not have happened had it not been for Baltimore. Baltimore helped to set the tide and helped to set the tone for everything we are seeing right now. And Baltimore needs to take credit for that. And we would not have even seen what we saw 5 years ago in Baltimore had it not been for the work that was taking place before before the murder of Freddie Gray. If it weren't for the work of Tawanda Jones, if it weren't for the work of activists, progress is a culminating force. And the thing we have to remember about this too is that progress is not inevitable, right? There's this idea that, oh yeah, just as time goes, things get better. Says who? Things get better because we make it better. And there's this, and when we say make it better, it is both going to be about individual work, but it is also going to be about laws changing. You know, Dr. King actually has a great quote where he says, laws don't change the heart, but they can protect me from the heartless. Laws must change. And that's across the board. As we're talking about the demand for justice, not just in the demand for justice when it comes to police accountability, but it comes for the demand for justice when it comes to environmental health, when it comes to the demand for justice when it comes to educational health, when it comes to the demand for justice when it comes for housing health. I mean, we have a city that has truly been this culmination of inconsistent and in many ways inhumane policies.
Yeah.
So the way we have to address this is understanding that if justice and if progress is going to be a culminating force, one of the things that it must culminate to is an honest evaluation about where we are and understanding that individual acts will not get us to where we need to get to. We need laws to actually keep up with where the people are.
I want to thank you, Wes. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Tawanda. Thank you, Greg, for your time today. Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, and the origin of the word atonement actually comes from the words at one mint. That's true, right? Atonement is about coming together. Each of you has layered your own stories on top of one another's, and now you've added your stories to our Yom Kippur observance. I'm incredibly grateful for that. And I know that as our congregation ponders our own sense of atonement, how do we do better in the coming year? We now have so much more to think about. Thank you for helping us be at one with each of you, and through you at one with the great unity that exists in the universe that we call God. Thank you, and God bless each of you.
Bless you.
God bless all of you. God bless all of you.